Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is David Wood. I'm the Special Projects Manager for Early Music America. We want to thank you all for joining us today. A few housekeeping issues. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can put those into the chat menu and we will keep track of those and ask those toward the end of today's presentation. If for some reason typing is not easy for you, we'll also have a period of time where you can use the raise hand function, which is when you click participants in the bottom menu of Zoom, you can raise your hand and we'll try to do that. And if there are people who it's harder to ask the question with the chat, then I can unmute individuals and we can ask those questions toward the end. Just a few things here right at the very beginning. This is the fourth of our interest sessions that we've been offering on Mondays in the last 4 weeks. And today we're really excited to have Nick Jones with us to present about English madrigals, and his background has dealt with many different types of poetry and madrigals, and not just English madrigals, Italian as well, and others. And Nick has a wide experience with early music. He also serves on the board for Early Music America, and we're really excited to hear this presentation today. We are inviting contributions still to the EMA Relief Fund, which is supporting early musicians in need. You can find information about how to donate to the Relief Fund by going to earlymusicamerica.org. You can find that in the banner that's on the home page. You can also find out about our programs as well as upcoming interest sessions by following us on social media. We've got the information here on the screen: Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And this session, along with the past sessions and future sessions, are all archived or will be archived on our YouTube channel. We also have previous webinar recordings from all of the past years of our Young Performers Festival and Emerging Artists Showcase, and much more on our YouTube channel. So we invite you to visit that. And if you would like to know more about EMA's programs, you can find that in our weekly newsletter, which comes out on Tuesdays. And you can sign up for that by text. If you text early music all together to 42828, or you can use the sign up button at the bottom of earlymusicamerica.org. Like I said, those newsletters go out every single Tuesday, and they have information about EMA's programs, as well as information from around the early music community in North America and beyond. And during this time of the global health crisis, we've also introduced a Friday update because of the rapidly changing nature of resources and necessities. And so we've been having sort of an addendum that comes out on Fridays. So you can get those updates by going to our website. So without any more from me, we're going to turn this over now to our presenter today, Nick Jones, and I will step away and I will keep track in the comments. If anyone has any questions throughout, you can use the chat feature to send me a message directly. And that's David Wood. EMA is the user in the chat menu, and I'll help you as much as I can during the process. If you have questions, you can chat those directly into the main chat menu for everyone, or you can also just send those directly to me if you would prefer. So now I'll turn it over to Nick. And you're on mute.
All right, I guess I'm here. Thank you all for joining me. This is so exciting to be talking to people across the country and perhaps internationally, I don't know. It's my first Zoom lecture, so bear with me if there are some glitches. And I just want to emphasize reinforce what David said about EMA's Musician Relief Fund. This being Easter Monday, think of all the early musicians who have lost gigs over Passover and Easter. And this relief fund has already supported hundreds of musicians with small grants to keep them going. So I urge you to donate to that if you can. Madrigals, what a wonderful thing to talk about. I've taught 17th and 16th century English poetry for years at Oberlin College. Many of the poems I teach are big and complicated, Donne, Spenser, Milton. But every time I teach, I love coming back to these tiny poems that seem so simple at first glance and are so wonderful. And I'll be talking about their texts and really what those texts might tell us about the 16th century. But also, of course, we can't do this without some music, so I'll be playing some of the tunes. So to start right off, I'm going to share my screen, and in a minute we'll find my PowerPoint. Right, so here's a picture from the 19th century English painter imagining some folks sitting around in a paneled oak room and singing madrigals. I hope you can imagine that those madrigals spoke to the 19th century, of course, and I think they speak to us in the 21st century. Here's some wonderful ladies, the Concerto delle Donne in Northern Italy, the young sopranos who made madrigal singing virtuoso art, and I'm thinking they have something to say to us. We're going to start with a very familiar madrigal to you. April is in my mistress' face. And let's just hear a bit of that.
Oh, Nick, the sound is coming through. I think you might need to reshare with your computer sound.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's. And David, where was that?
When you click share screen at the bottom on the left, there is the little window that pops up. It says share computer sound below all of the various.
There it is.
Yep.
Sound better? So April is in my mistress' face. It looks like it is a very simple poem, but it's actually kind of full of some of the complexities that tell us that 16th century poets and musicians, it's no news to all of us listening, loved complexity. Let's just look at a couple of the wonderful parallelisms here, which kind of leap out from the page, I guess. April, we have a seasonal parallelism, of course. And let me get my pen out. We have April, oh well, I won't try. April, July, September, and December. So in 4 lines, we have an entire range of the seasons. We also have a parallel kind of sequence in the parts of the body, the face, the eyes, the bosom, and the heart. The 16th century poetry loved the rhetorical structure called the blason or blazon, B-L-A-Z-O-N, which took the parts usually of a woman's body, but not always, and spoke about them in turn. And that's part of what this tiny poem, I suppose, probably by Thomas Morley himself, is doing. The poem sets up a wonderful parallelism. The face is to the eyes, that is, say the eyes are in the face as The heart is to the bosom, to the larger torso. So we begin with the larger face, we zoom in on the eyes, we move to the bosom and zoom in on the heart itself. April is in my mistress' face. Why? Well, of course, because it's such a beautiful month and that she is so beautiful. And July, or Julie, I think the singers had it, in her eyes hath place. Well, July, of course, fecundity, richness. Her eyes are full of that which inspires the poet to write and to sing. Hath place. The poems might sound as if that end of the first couplet, face, place, is a kind of letdown. July in her eyes hath place. Hath place. It's not a very exciting phrase on first thought, but it is actually. Having place in the 16th century was to have privilege, a place of privilege. So July is really privileged, is sitting enthroned in her eyes. Within her bosom is September, of course, harvest. That's where the richness comes. And of course, this is the sexual sequence of the madrigal, leading us from the contemplation of beauty to perhaps the closer intimacy with the bosom largely figured, not necessarily the bosom as we think of it. But in her heart, of course, a cold December. I think the seasonal surprise at the end, the punch, and most madrigals have a little punch like this. The punch comes, the pivot, the inversion becomes even more powerful when we remember that the 1590s was across Europe the little ice age when the Thames froze and whole banquets were held on the frozen ice. So it's quite beautiful poem, a very short one. And of course, that's what she has to text to us. But madrigals tell us how important music was to the 16th century. Here's a little wonderful picture of 4 singers with part books. Each of them get their own part. Of course, they don't get a score the way we do today. They have to rely on their own sense of pitch and read those funky little rests in between. But they're out in this beautiful enameled flower meadow. And constantly, the madrigals bring us back and forth to think about music. Here's another wonderful madrigal, which you may well know. I've taken all these, I think they're all from Philip Ledger's wonderful Oxford book of English madrigals. Strike it up, Tabor, and there's a medieval, a little earlier illustration of a pipe and tabor player. Pipe, strike it up, Tabor, and pipe us a favor, thou shalt be well paid for thy labor. I mean to spend my shoe sole to dance about the maypole. I will be blithe and brisk, leap and skip, hop and trip, turn about in the rout, until very weary joints can scarce frisk. Thomas Weelkes' wonderful setting of this. Let's again just catch that in our ear.
Strike it up, strike it up, time was a bad, was a shine, we will shine, we will by labor. Strike it up, time was a bad, was a shine, we will shine, we will by labor. I mean to spend my shoes on to dance about the Bible. I will be blithe and brisk, I will never top it up and good until very, very, very joints can scarce frisk. I mean to spend my shoes on to dance about the Bible. I will be blithe and brisk, never top it up and good until very, very, very joints can scarce frisk.
Strike it up, Tabor. So we have a very rhythmic setting of this very rhythmic poem. Strike it up, Tabor, and pipe us a favor, full of strong, plosive sounds. Strike it up, Tabor, pipe us a favor, thou shalt be well paid for thy labor. And full, too, of rapidly recurring rhymes, which create another sense of continuous rhythm. The poets, again, perhaps Wilkes wrote this poem himself. The poets were writing for the possibilities of music and looking ahead. So as soon as he starts a poem about a drum, it's going to be a poem about and full of the rhythm of the drum. Now, it's also a poem about how wonderful and important dancing is, and dancing and music, even when they exhaust us. Imagine your madrigal group starting to sing this Wilkes and finding the difficulties in this very complicated music. Leap and skip, hop and trip, count, 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 or else you're going to get off, because if you're singing the tenor and the alto is going to sing that thing at a very slightly different moment, and you better keep your place in the dance. The music of the madrigal, just like the poem of the madrigal, imitates the dance. It invokes it. It really incarnates it. You can't have a line like leap and skip, hop and trip without thinking about dancing. In fact, even just being in it, even if your weary joints can scarce frisk, which at a certain age becomes a really important line to remember, that, at least for me. Now, dancing in the late 16th century was considered basically a patriotic act if you were an Anglican. That is, unless you were of the Puritan sect, that sect which was later to take over in the 1640s the government of England and to ban many forms of dancing and entertainment. And if you were a Puritan, you didn't think so highly of dancing. But if you were of the general persuasion, that is, you went along with the Anglican settlement that Elizabeth and her father Henry had created, you loved the dancing, and you loved the basic sports, the recreations, the maypole, the excitement of May Day, 1st of May, the happiness, the sexual freedom, the communal freedom of dancing around the maypole. So this is not just a poem about music, but it's a poem about a particular function of music, that is to engage the community, as Elizabeth and her successor, James I, kept insisting music and dance pull things together. Again, the Puritans disagreed with that. But music is important, and the poem signifies that, not just by talking about music, but by showing the poet and the singer's intention about music. Look how it goes. Thou shalt be paid well for thy labor. So music is not just fun, it's part of the basic political economy, and you shall be paid well for it. Please donate to the AMIA Relief Fund if you possibly can help pay for labor. I mean, says the poet, to spend my shoe sole, that is to run my shoes ragged, dancing around the maypole. He intends to engage this. The poem is full of this intentionality. Again, I will be blithe and brisk. I will leap and skip. I will hop and trip. I will turn about in the rout, that wonderful quick rhyming turn about, in the rout, in the crowd, in the mix, until very weary joints can scarce frisk. So music was incredibly important for the 16th century. Here's a maypole, again from a 19th century engraving. And here's a Puritan who is saying boo hiss, though that's covered up by EMA in my screen. I don't know if it is for you. Now, it was really important to know how to sing this stuff. So I'm going to turn for a moment to Thomas Morley, not Robert Morley, that's a different mode. And Morley's wonderful, plain and easy introduction to practical music set down in form of a dialogue. This dialogue is actually extraordinarily interesting in many ways. And I want to read you just a hint of that. Morley. Here's what the plain and easy introduction to practical music begins with a dialogue between a character named Philomathes and an old friend. And up at the top of this screen, Philomathes is saying, where are you going? To seek out an old friend of mine. Well, his friend says, didn't you go to a banquet, a party last night? And Philomathes says, yes, it's true indeed. And there were a number of excellent scholars, gentlemen and others. But all that proposed, which was then discoursed upon, was music. In other words, they were just talking about music all day. I trust, says his friend, you were contented to suffer others to speak of that matter. Oh, I would that that had been the worst, for I was compelled to discover mine own ignorance and confess that I knew nothing at all in it. Well, it turns out he doesn't know anything, so he kept silent. But, and now I'm going down near the end of this section, but supper being ended, he doesn't get away with that. And music books, that's part books, according to the custom, being brought to the table, the mistress of the house presented me with a part, earnestly requesting me to sing. But when, after many excuses, I protested unfeignedly that I could not, everyone began to wonder. Yea, some whispered to others, demanding how I was brought up. So that upon shame of mine ignorance, I go now to seek out mine old friend, Master Norimus, to make myself his scholar. So if you didn't sing in the 16th century and had pretensions to be a gentleman, you were in big trouble. Music's important. Here's another wonderful madrigal about music and dancing. It begins with Robin Hood, Maid Marian, the ancient folk tales that were in the Elizabethan age being rewritten and made into fancy literature, and Little John. But since the Robin Hood, Maid Marian, and Little John are gone, the hobby horse was quite forgot. The hobby horse, that kids toy there, not in the picture, but with a stick with a horse's head on it that you run around, was quite forgot when Kemp did dance Alona. On the right is a woodcut of the Shakespearean actor William Kemp, who danced a Morris dance all the way from London to Norwich with various press stops to get interviews and get his picture taken. This is, of course, one of those wonderful pictures. He then wrote a book about Morris dancing from London to Norwich. It's, 100 miles or something like that. He did labor after the Tabor, says the madrigal, for to dance then into France. Well, we don't have a record that he danced actually across the channel, but we know that this book was read in France. He took pains to skip it. In hope of gains, he did trip it on the toe, diddle, 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 do. Let's listen to this.
Since Robin Hood, Maid Marian, and Little John are gone, the hobby horse was quite forgot when Kemp did dance alone. Since Robin Hood, Maid Marian, and Little John are gone, the hobby horse was quite forgot when Kemp did dance alone. He did labor after the Tabor for to dance then into France, for to dance then into France. He took pains to skip it in hope of gains, He did drip it on the toe, diddle, 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 do, diddle, 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 do. He did labor after the Tabor.
In the interest of time, we'll skip the repeat. I said that music, it was important to learn music, and you to sing these madrigals, of course, in the 16th century, again by part, without weekly rehearsals, I think. You have to not just to know how to do the basic intervals, since Robin Hood, Maid Marian, but you have to do switches of tempo, switches of meter, here at measure 10. This wonderful moment as the poem sets up a triple meter. He did labor after the Tabor for to dance then into France. He did labor after the Tabor for to dance then into France. So you have to be able to do that, of course. And if you're a tenor, or an alto, look what you have to do. You have to decorate the little dance. Word painting, I haven't even mentioned the word, but how important it is here. These poems are made for moments of expressive music making that make them sing out. So we get just dance, dance them into France. And again, the music is itself dancing, and the sopranos actually get it in the next bar. Dance them into France. And then what you have to do, take a look at what happens with, he took pains to skip, to dance, to skip it. So to skip, to skip, to skip, to skip, to skip, to skip in hope of gains. And then the wonderful nonsense syllables. If you think of English madrigals and you mention this to anybody, you probably came up with fa la 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 la. Well, this one, we haven't had a fa la, we'll get to one in a minute. But here's diddle 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 do, diddle 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 do. Recorder players would know that's a wonderful exercise for tonguing. Diddle 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 do, diddle 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 do. It's also a great exercise for singing. What are these nonsense words doing in these madrigals? Well, maybe he needed a rhyme for toe and just couldn't think of a cool one. Maybe the madrigal is so self-consciously unserious, it's so self-consciously recreational, that it just attracts these wonderful, crazy moments. Well, back to my PowerPoint. Oh, by the way, Will Kemp played in Shakespeare's, we know one of the parts he played was Dogberry, the wonderful constable who gets every word mixed up, does everything wrong, and finds out the criminal in A Much Ado About Nothing. Well, madrigals are about music. They're also about melancholy. So, and they're contemporaneous with this guy, not Laurence Olivier, but Hamlet. The time is out of joint, O cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right. Hamlet is one of those 17th century characters who is not only melancholy himself, but is a satirist. That is, he's a critic of society. And in typical of turn of the century societies, fin de siècle, it became known much later, the Elizabethan 1590s and 1600 were consumed with a kind of melancholy about the state of being in the world. And we get many, many madrigals that are seriously engaged with that melancholy, seriously engaged, and yet constantly also playful and inventive. And here, of course, is another one of the most famous. You probably sang it in high school chorus, The Silver Swan. Now, swans are thought to have had no song until their death. And so we get the famous phrase, a swan song. There is also, from having done my Wikipedia research, there's a swan called the mute swan, but who occasionally bursts into rather ugly singing, as I learned anyway. The silver swan, so back to the poem, the silver swan who living whilst alive had no note, had no music, when death approached, unlocked her silent throat. Already the poem's actually telling us something about the position of the poet and the musician in a time of struggle. That is, silence is often the best thing to do. The throat of the swan is silent. Now, it's the swan's throat is silent because that's what swans do. But Gibbons or Shakespeare or Hamlet may have to be silent because it's more discreet to be silent in a bad time. But at death, she unlocks her silent throat. Leaning her breast, what a wonderful word painting word, leaning, the Italian word appoggiatura, meaning leaning, and that little grace, that ornament, leaning her breast, you'll hear, leaning her breast against the reedy shore, thus sung her first and last, and sung no more. The satirist speaks once because it's not a welcome speaking, it's not welcome speaking truth to power. And what does the swan speak about? Farewell, all joys. That doesn't sound like he had a lot of joys, but anyway, let go. O death, come close mine eyes. More geese than swans now live, more fools than wise. More geese, ugly birds, swans, beautiful birds, geese, honking, foolish, go around in crowds, get in the way, poop on the lawn. Swans swim gracefully in pairs across the Avon River at Stratford and generally have a quality of wisdom. Again, we have a systematic parallelism. Joy, farewell to joy, invitation to death. Farewell, joy, invite death. Geese, fools, swans, wise, more geese, fewer swans. So we get generally a sense of that the world is really quite wretched. One of the terms in the 16th and 17th century, a very popular term for this state of being, was melancholy, the accumulation of black bile in the body. I'll skip that for now. There's our geese coming in. And I'm going to turn to another rather quaintly melancholy poem. Anybody guess what it is? It's To Wit, To Woo, or Sweet Suffolk Owl. Oops, back. Sweet Suffolk Owl, so trimly dight, a poem really about an owl. So we have not just a swan swimming around and dying, but here an owl at night singing in the forest. So trimly dight, so trimly dressed, neatly dressed with feathers like a lady bright. Possible little social satire there about people who wear too many feathers. Thou sing'st alone, singing by night, to wit, to woo. Thy note that forth so freely rolls, a poem of praise of this owl, isn't it? It's a poem about how beautiful and solitary and powerful this owl is, and how wonderfully free its music is that forth so freely rolls. And as the poem ends, we realize that this poem is not, that the owl's music is not just beautiful, but is quite actually terrifying and is full of the kind of contemplation that a melancholy person would have at night, thinking about ghosts and death. This note, the owl's music, with shrill command, the mouse controls. Invert those words, controls the mouse. So the owl, with its sound, actually freezes, paralyzes the mouse so it can sweep down. I don't know if this is true or not. Ornithologists can tell us. And sings a dirge for dying souls, to wit, to woo. I think it's worth catching a bit of that sound.
Sweet, sweet, sweet Suffolk Owl. Sweet, sweet Suffolk Owl. Sweet, sweet Suffolk Owl. Sweet Suffolk Owl. So trimly dight, with feathers like a lady bright. Sweet Suffolk Owl, so trimly dight, with feathers like a lady bright. Thou sing'st alone, sitting by night. Sing'st alone, sitting by night. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do
reluctantly, I'm going to stop that just in the interests of time. But you've noticed, of course, how wonderfully this poem has set up some word painting, like the feathers for the Lady Bright, which are fluffy and cute. So we have feathers like a Lady Bright, and then thou singst alone, one voice sings it, and then is joined by the other. To wit, to woo is obvious. And at the end, when you have time, go back and listen to the wonderful end of this dirge for the dying souls, which is beautifully characterized. Here's another wonderful melancholic poem by Thomas Wilkes. "O care, thou wilt dispatch me if music does not match me. O cares, cares, you will kill me. You will send me to my death if music does not match thee." Again, perhaps a feeble rhyme at first glance, but I think actually quite powerful. Matching meant standing up to. It meant an active kind of opposition. So music is now matching, is now opposing care. "So deadly dost thou sting me, mirth only help can bring me." Only mirth can bring me health. So here, music and its corollary mirth have become the antidotes to care and death. And we have, of course, now finally, fa la 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 la. Nonsense, yes, but a kind of accepted characterization in its times of the mirth that this poem speaks to. Notice, again, the poems are more complicated than you might think. There's a little bit of tense change here. "O care, thou wilt dispatch me." You will, future tense, or a conditional future, if music does not match thee. So it begins in the future. So, but moves through the first falas to a present tense. "So deadly dost thou sting me." So it becomes more intense. It's right brought home that mirth only can help bring me. Well, perhaps enough of melancholy for the moment. Let's talk about the Queen. Of course, madrigals were about power and the power of the Queen. Queen Elizabeth was now in her old age, was to die in 1603. Most of the madrigals we're talking about are coming from about the late 1590s and early 1600s. Here's one by William Byrd from 1590, "The Sweet and Merry Month of May." Let's look at the text. "In this sweet and merry month of May, I spoke about Elizabeth and her love of May Day. While nature wantons in her prime." Now, nature is wantoning here. In other words, fecundity. Everything's blooming, rabbits and birds and bees and stuff. This might seem inappropriate for the Virgin Queen, but constantly poems in praise of her engaged her restrained and sexuality that had become the kind of the metaphor for the fecundity and the prosperity of the entire nation. So it's quite appropriate, I think, that we have birds to sing and beasts to play for pleasure of the joyful time. And for pleasure of the joyful time, I choose the first, that is, the 1st of May, May 1st, which was not the Marxist May Day that we might celebrate today, but still had political implications. I choose the 1st for holiday, holy day, and greet Eliza with a rhyme. Okay, a rhyme meaning basically a poem or a madrigal, I guess. And here's the rhyme. The rhyme becomes the second part of the poem, just to the 2 final lines. And from a kind of 6-line introduction to the entire thing, here's what I'm going to do because it's May Day, then we get this beautiful statement, "O beauteous queen of 2nd Troy," come back to that. Take well in worth a simple toy. O beauteous queen, he speaks to the majesty of the queen, the beauty of the queen, and the epic quality. The queen is the queen of second Troy because England was said to have been founded by Brutus, not Julius Caesar's Brutus, but an earlier one who had fled from Troy, just like Aeneas had fled from Troy to found Rome. Brutus had fled from Troy to found England. And this is the second Troy. So this is a grand line, a beauteous queen, highly epic and full, take well, and then followed by this reminder that we're actually just in the middle of a madrigal. And why not? In a very organized tribute to Queen Elizabeth, Morley and others published a book called The Triumphs of Oriana. Oriana, a metaphor, a metonym for Elizabeth, of madrigals that were all commissioned, and they all had to end with the same couplet. Then sang the shepherds and nymphs of Diana, Diana the Virgin Goddess, long live fair Oriana. And the best known of these really is Wilkes's wonderful Vesta was full of word painting. Where could we word paint? Well, as with Vesta, the queen, the Vestal Virgin, the queen herself, was from Latmos Hill, Parnassus, the hill of the Muses, descending as she was walking down. We better get some descending scales. She spied, I'm sorry, I spoke wrong. Vesta is Diana, the maiden goddess. As she's descending from the hills, from the heavens, she spies a maiden queen, that is Elizabeth, walking up the hill, the same ascending, attended all by all the shepherd swain. Elizabeth, as was well known, loved her pretty boys around her, and that's where they are. To whom Diana's darling, that's up at the top, her Vestal Virgins, came running down amain. First 2 by 2, then 3 by 3, obvious place to put 2 voices together, and then 3 voices together. 3 by 3 together with an accumulation of rhythm here that's kind of wonderful. 2 by 2 and 3 by 3 together, leaving the goddess all alone. Diana hasted thither to Elizabeth and mingling with the shepherds of their train. Now, remember, these are Vestal Virgins, but what we have is a pretty exciting little mixer, a freshman mixer at college, showing my age, and mingling with those shepherds to dance and team up with mirthful, and of course to sing with mirthful tunes, her present entertain. Then sang the shepherds and nymphs of Diana, long live fair Oriana. Just a couple of moments of this.
As Vesta was from Latmos Hill descending, from Latmos Hill descending, she spied a maiden queen ascending.
I just wanted you to hear the running down amain. Isn't it wonderful? So it's about music. It's about melancholy. It's about the queen, and it's about, the madrigal is about sex. Fair Phyllis, I saw sitting all alone. There are so many fair Phyllis madrigals out there. Fair Phyllis, I saw sitting all alone, feeding her flock near to the mountainside. The shepherds knew not whither she was gone, but after her lover Amyntas he went. Up and down he wandered. You're going to love the word painting possibilities of that. Up and down he wandered while she was missing. When he found her, oh, then they fell a-kissing. The rhyme is obvious. It's a setup from the very beginning, but the kissing, the sexuality, the wonderful connection is all set up by this isolation with which the poem begins. Fair Phyllis, I saw, I don't know who I is, but there's an observer here who's watching, who's presumably alone and is watching this alone nymph sitting all alone, feeding her flock near to the mountainside. The shepherds knew not whither she was gone, but oh, look, here comes Amyntas, wandering up and down. So the I at the very beginning, as a metonym for us, the singers, the readers of this poetry, we know what's going to happen, especially once we come to the word missing. He wandered while she was missing. Nothing else can happen. Well, except kissing. I guess we could have hissing, but that wouldn't. Well, all right, I don't want to go there. So what a wonderful, tight little narrative, very implied. And my last example, another wonderful poem about love. Hark, all ye lovely saints above. That would be basically all the beautiful ladies that are here, enthroned by courtly love, that we look up to. Hark, listen, all you beautiful ladies. Diana, the virgin goddess, hath agreed with love, Cupid, Eros, erotic. So we have virginalism agreeing with love. I've agreed with love, his fiery weapon, his bow and arrow that slices you up and makes you full of passion, to remove. Okay, does that mean we're all becoming chaste? Fa la 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 la. I don't think so. Let's go on. Do you not see how they agree, Diana and Eros? Then cease, fair ladies. Why weep ye? Why are the ladies weeping? I think because passion is dangerous. Passion and chastity are at odds with each other. In all the great romance comedies of Shakespeare, this constantly happens. How do you fall in love when you need to keep chaste by a certain number of important rules? Why weep ye? Why weep ye now? Because you don't need to weep, because love and Diana are now working together. Is that because Elizabeth is the queen and has said that virginality will become prosperity? I think so. See, your mistress bids you cease weeping and welcome love with love's increase. What's love's increase? Prosperity, pregnancy, enjoyment, sexuality, all of these things. Diana hath procured your peace. So the goddess of chastity has now won and has taken over Cupid, but not defeated him. His bow is forlorn. Cupid hath sworn his bow forlorn to break and burn. Ere ladies mourn, he doesn't want any of this sadness to encounter, to keep us going. Fa la 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 la. And I will just end with a hint of how beautiful this is.
Lovely saints above, Diana hath agreed with love, his fiery weapon to remove.
So I've made a fairly serious interpretation of this poem, but as soon as we hear Wilkes's music and those great nonsense syllables, we know that it is both serious and utterly, wonderfully, recreationally frivolous. I'll stop there and maybe we can handle some questions. I'm going to stop my sharing, come back to the screen.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Or if you have something that you would like to ask, you can also, in the participants menu, you can click the little button that says raise hand. That will alert me, and then I could unmute you if it's something that you
Questions,
prefer to ask.
questions and comments. There's a couple in the chats already. Hey, diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, those syllables are onomatopoeic, says Tony Martin, for fiddling, accompanying and motivating the dancers. I love it.
Any questions from anyone? Let's see any at this moment. And Nick, you were going to put some, give some text. Do you, are you able to put those in the chat, the PDF that you have?
Yes.
If not, I could do that for you.
I got it.
It's a file, putting this, there's a PDF that's now in the chat menu that you can download that has more information about this.
I'll just,
loading here.
I'll just end with a couple of reference books, which I've just put into the chat box. The Oxford Book of English Madrigals. You can get cheap copies used on Amazon, get 6 of them and have your friends over. Fellows English Madrigal Verse, all the texts of all the madrigals. And my own book, which shamelessly plugged, of translations, modern verse translations of Italian madrigals and commentaries, all of which you can find. In fact, my book you can read for free and until June, because of the University of Michigan's Press's generosity. So the link to that is there on that PDF that I've just put down.
We did have one question here, or a couple, I think, asking about the Italian madrigals, and they say they're a whole different thing, aren't they?
They are a whole different thing, and they're much more based into the Petrarchan system of courtly love. They flourished particularly in northern Italy, and they rarely have nonsense syllables. They're more intricately composed, and I think that's why we tend a bit to ignore the English madrigals. So that's a great question, and this was my attempt to say, hey, the English madrigals are just actually quite as interesting as the Italian ones as well. A lot of high school students sing these songs. How do you recommend sharing the history without emphasizing the sexual references so blatantly? Oh, excuse me. I don't really know how to do that. I've taught college, and at Oberlin we can talk about lots of things. I think one could just assume that as soon as we talk about love, well, we have to talk about the body. I don't know. I'm not sure what I would do. I would go ahead and talk about the body and the sexual references, but obviously not blatantly, and not, I wouldn't want to be lascivious about it. It's a great question, and I'm not sure I know what to do with that. What did the music look like? Not like ours, I imagine. Indeed, the part books, I should have put a picture of a part book up here, but if you Googled madrigal part book and look for images, you'll see the difficult things that they looked at. And again, each of us would have been holding our own part in our own hands, not knowing what the others were doing. It demanded a great deal of integration with our friends. They were designed for single, one on a part singing so that you could stand in a circle and look at each other, because you'll want to watch and listen as the soprano does her entrance, and you need to guess, gosh, if she just sang la la, am I supposed to sing la la, or am I supposed to sing in a slightly different key, la la? And you learned those kinds of things. a great comment from Melike. I sang some of these madrigals in middle school and high school, and the sexual nature was discussed. That was in LA, wasn't it? It all depends on how tasteful the teacher is able to keep the discussion. Sex ed was part of my high school curriculum. Thank you for that. All right, well, thanks so much. And please go out and listen to madrigals. And if you can sing safely at social distancing, have a great sing session as well.
It's a great time to practice singing from part books and just singing with one part. Learn your one part really well, and that way when you get back with your friends, you've got your part and they can all learn their individual parts on there. So unfortunately, we have to kind of wait for that. Thank you so much to you, Nick, for today's presentation. We really appreciate it is extremely informative and with texts that many of us were already familiar with and just looking at them in a very different way. So thank you so much. And we want to invite you every Monday afternoon for our interest sessions. We're still nailing down the topic for next Monday. We'll announce that here in the next few days. You can always go to our website, earlymusicamerika.org. And when you are there, under what EMA does, you can look under the resources and learning column, and there's an online interest sessions page that you can find, and we'll have the registration link. We also will have this and past interest sessions. The videos will be posted there as well as on our YouTube channel for Early Music America. Please watch our Facebook and Twitter for announcements of upcoming sessions as well. On behalf of Early Music America, thank you once again to Nick, and thank you everyone who joined us today via Zoom and on Facebook Live. Thank you.
Thank you.